Hey there, vernacular faithful. Redcoat here, and I'm going to be continuing the talk about the philosophy of play. Now, previously we talked about recognition and uncertainty, but now we're going to talk about the next natural step, which is adaptation. This is, of course, one of the four important portions of play, which is recognition, uncertainty, adaptation, and experience. And adaptation is particularly important because this is one of the more active. I mean, all of it is active, but this is one where the player is actually recognizing what's happening around them and changing their play to match it. And originally, based off of the book Man, Games, and Play, this was mimicry. And the reason why I wanted to change the term from mimicry is because mimicry is reductive to what actually happens in games. Because you see, with mimicry, it's just kind of exactly doing what has come before you. And while that is something that players can do and will do when playing games, the fact of the matter is adaptation is more than that. And you do more than that in video games. In particular, you don't just imitate what has been presented before you, but you change your actions. You change the actions that you are imitating to make them yours. Or, in certain circumstances, you're not even imitating something. You are just simply seeing a situation that is occurring around you and changing your actions in response to it. So that is why I changed that from mimicry to adaptation. And it's a much simpler element than the others with regards to the aspects of it that are fun. But what's really important about it is the fact that it interacts with everything else. Because it interacts with recognition, specifically because with recognition you see what is happening, you see what's happening around you, and then you adapt in response to it. And that adaptation then feeds back into the recognition portion because your adaptation either makes you play better or makes you play worse. And the signs that are presented by the game, the signs that are presented by your opponents, and the signs that are presented by your audience will determine whether or not you need to adapt again, or whether the adaptation was just in general positive. Now, it should also be noted that some adaptations aren't necessarily utilitarian in nature. What I mean by that is it's not always about adapting to make your play better or worse. Sometimes it's adapting to make your play more fun or more stylish. And so that's something that shows up in games like Devil May Cry, for instance, where you're just trying to make your play look more interesting. And so as you're playing, you're like, oh, well, that'd be really cool if I did this, or it'd be really cool if I did that. And so you change how you're playing to match that. There's also things such as what would we call it? SSX tricky, where yes, there is a trick meter, and you do get assigned points for your play, and so there is an element of the adaptation that is just making the points go up, and so that is a play improvement angle. But there's also an element of just style with making your character look really cool while they're spinning through the air and doing trick Y and trick Z and all of that sort of thing. And so that's one element of adaptation that is not represented in the term mimicry, and I think that's important there because that also goes outside of performance games and goes into games where you're doing a lot of customization. At which point, it's not so much that you're adapting to the play, but you're adapting elements of what you're doing to look a bit different. And so you're adapting to what other people are going to see, what you think other people are going to see. And so it kind of plays into elements of that recognition and elements of that uncertainty as well, because you don't know if people are going to like it or not. And in some regard, in some cases, if it's something where it's you've imagined what it's going to be like, but you don't actually have the fullness in front of you, you don't even necessarily know if you're going to like it. But yeah, so that's the adaptive part of play, and that's very important. And when it comes to games in particular, because the adaptation, actually changing your play to match a thing and successfully doing so or failing to do so and needing to adapt again, like that is a fun part of play, and that's why novelty is so important. Again, it feeds back into that uncertainty element where, uncertainty, I don't know if this is going to be something I like, or I don't know if how I'm going to play this is going to win or lose. But that novelty aspect is also like it's presented a new thing. Well, I have to adapt to this. And so whenever you have something that is novel, you are forced to learn what it is, recognize it, and then consider what's going to be the way to approach it and update your play to match or exceed the expectations of the game in question, if the game has expectations in that area. And if there aren't necessarily expectations put on you by the game, to match or exceed your own expectations and it might even be something as ephemeral as, will this look cool? Something like in Armored Core, there's no performance attached to putting a color scheme on your mech. It really is just a bit of personal preference, and also whether or not it looks good to other people. And in that regard, you're not adapting to anything in the game, but you are using the game to adapt to your own design sensibilities. At any rate, that's the more broad presentation of adaptation. And I know there's elements of this that I could see a lot of people kind of disagreeing a little bit with. But the overall idea is that adaptation is a fun part of play. It's an important part of play, and it's one of the reasons why novelty is so important to people having fun. It's one of the things that makes it. It's not like the most important thing. Don't get me wrong, but it's one of the things that will make something more fun. Is when it is new and you have to adapt your sensibilities to it. You have to, in a sense, play with it, so to speak. So that's the adaptive element in general. It's a little bit simpler than the others. So next time I'll be talking about the fourth and last part of it, which is experience, which is, I think, similarly simple, but when I get into it, it might turn out to be a bit more. We will see. At any rate, this is Redcoat signing off. Play the games you want to play, boyos.